The fear of rejection is a powerful force that can drive one person to pursue another with an almost frantic intensity. This fear that their ego will be hurt by being rejected is what often drives someone to desperately seek reconnection. This may resonate with you if you find yourself in a similar situation, where that energy of rejection and need for approval becomes dominant. In his book on seduction, Robert mentions that after you have seduced someone, it is common for there to be a pause, a small disappointment that often leads to a separation. However, it is surprisingly easy to rekindle those old feelings. They never completely disappear, they lie dormant, and at any moment, they can be awakened, taking the other person by surprise. There is an example that illustrates this dynamic well. A person, after fulfilling an important duty on a rainy, cold day, receives messages of support and thanks from other people. This support gives him emotional warmth that contrasts with the adverse weather. And although her situation is complicated, she feels comforted to know that she is not alone. This reflects how, sometimes, an unexpected reconnection can bring relief and a sense of belonging. Today the focus is on understanding how to recapture the interest of someone who seems to be moving away. If that person has already distanced themselves, it is possible to work on their return, awakening those feelings that, although apparently dormant, are still there, waiting for the right moment to resurface. In The Art of Seduction, it is explained that the fear of rejection has the capacity to alter the dynamics between people, reversing the roles in a relationship. An Austrian psychoanalyst, a disciple of Freud, mentioned that rejection is a lesson in the art of loving. This idea makes a lot of sense if we reflect on how, when someone shows us too much attention, we often start to take them for granted, losing the initial interest and excitement. Constant acceptance can become monotonous, to the point that what once excited us now goes unnoticed. An example of this dynamic can be seen in childhood. When a child receives a new toy, his attention is completely absorbed by it. However, if another child shows interest in one of his old toys, suddenly that old toy regains value. This principle applies equally in human relationships. When you begin to reject someone who had become accustomed to your constant attention, that person begins to notice the contrast and to value what he took for granted before. In this context, the book offers two important reflections. The first says, if you are easy to get, you can't be worth much, which underscores the idea that what is obtained without effort is not appreciated. The second reflection is, we only abandon those who bore us, which reinforces how boredom can lead to indifference and eventually abandonment. To further illustrate this concept, imagine that you have acquired something that has cost you a considerable amount of money. Naturally, you go out of your way to take care of it, making sure it doesn't get damaged or lost, because you know what it cost you to obtain it. On the other hand, when something is cheap and easily replaceable, the concern for its care diminishes, since you know that you can get another one quickly. The reason I mention this is so that you will better understand the message I want to convey to you. As I have pointed out before, people who are easy to predict do not generate curiosity, nor interest, which can lead to being ignored. This is a key moment for you. If that person is distancing themselves, you have a unique opportunity to completely change your attitudes and reactions. Don't make the mistake of complaining about lack of attention, or becoming predictable and boring. Make sure they associate you with pleasant experiences. Make sure they see you as a source of pleasure, not as someone who always brings trouble or conflict. It's natural that sometimes we fall into these patterns of behavior. And if you already have, don't worry. You can turn the situation around. This is where a very effective strategy mentioned in the book comes into play. Frustrating expectations. If the other person is already used to your reactions, to you always acting the same way, then they become predictable and therefore, uninteresting. They may think that, even if you get angry, eventually everything will go back to normal without them having to make any effort. In that case, you are no longer a challenge. And since you are no longer a challenge or a source of pleasure, it is easy to lose interest. The first technique you can apply is to frustrate those expectations. People find intriguing and attractive that which seems unattainable, or which they should not have. If you have always been available, giving more than necessary, you have probably tried to maintain the relationship by showing even more affection, attention, and dedication. But when the other person gets used to receiving all that effortlessly, they start to take it for granted. The interesting thing is, the moment you decide to stop offering everything they were used to, the other person will feel the lack, even if they seemed indifferent or disinterested before. This change can reverse the roles. Because when someone stops receiving what they took for granted, they begin to value it. The same goes for the body and mind. When we get used to something, its absence becomes noticeable, and that can awaken a new interest or desire. This strategy is not just about distancing yourself, but creating a contrast that makes the other person look at you again with new eyes, appreciating what you had previously taken for granted. Imagine this. At first, when you try something new, like smoking, it's common for your body to react negatively. Maybe you cough or feel uncomfortable. But over time, if you do it regularly, your body starts to crave that nicotine. Something similar happens with exercise. At first, the first few days can be hard, and the adaptation is complicated. However, after a while, it is the body itself that starts to ask you for that physical activity. The same happens with other habits, such as the consumption of water or sugar. And with anything that we get our body or mind used to, the brain, once it becomes habituated to receiving certain rewards, such as the substances it releases in the face of pleasant stimuli, it begins to become dependent on them. So, it's no wonder that a simple phone call, or the fact that someone knows they are important to you, also releases dopamine in that person. Eventually, their brain will begin to demand that dose of well-being, when they are not receiving it. The key here is to learn to gradually restrict or eliminate those things that you have been giving, and that the other person has begun to take for granted. In doing so, you begin to create a void, a contrast between what they once had, and what is now missing. It is at this point where the dynamics can change drastically. When you begin to frustrate that person's expectations, the roles are reversed. That person, who was previously sure of having you, is likely to start looking for you and doing things they had previously neglected. However, it is crucial that at that moment you do not give in to what you would normally do. Do not give him what he is expecting to receive, since it is precisely that security in your feelings that has allowed him to behave the way he has. The idea is that when that person looks for you or expects you to react in the usual way, you break that pattern. Don't fall easily into their games. Don't offer that quick solution they expect to get with their usual gestures. By doing so, you'll begin to change the perception they have of you, and generate a new type of interest. One based on uncertainty, and the novelty of not being able to predict your reactions. It is essential that when faced with a predictable situation, you respond in an unexpected way. This reaction must be different for each person, as there is no single formula that works for everyone. Some examples could be explored later, but the important thing to understand is that another powerful technique comes into play here: generating that fear of rejection. This fear of rejection, as mentioned above, has the power to completely change the dynamics in a relationship. If that person often uses the same methods to get what they want, it is crucial to make it clear that those methods will no longer work. However, it is not about being hostile or indifferent. It is about changing the way you react, so that the other person cannot predict your response. One effective way to generate this fear of rejection is, for example, to break with habitual patterns of behavior. If you used to respond immediately to their messages, now you can take some time, maybe let a couple of days pass before responding. When you finally do, you can mention that you've been too busy or that you had other priorities, making it clear that your life doesn't revolve around that person. Another infallible aspect to generate this fear is to understand that many times what keeps us attached to someone is not so much love or need, but the fear of being rejected. This fear leads us to do all kinds of things to avoid facing rejection. However, once you accept rejection as a natural possibility in life, everything changes. Recognizing that everyone, at some point, has experienced rejection, from the most fortunate to the least fortunate, is crucial. And most importantly, understanding that rejection is not the end of the world. In fact, learning to accept rejection strengthens your character and makes you more resilient to similar situations in the future. Over time, you develop a thicker skin, and what once could bring you down now becomes a learning experience that makes you stronger. This change in your attitude not only frees you from the fear of rejection, it also changes the way others perceive you and react to you. An effective strategy to arouse someone's fear of rejection is to make that person suspect that you might be interested in someone else. However, this should not be direct or overt. The key is to suggest, to leave subtle clues that allow the other person to imagine a story behind your actions. For example, you might start casually mentioning someone else's qualities, or commenting that you have been talking to someone, without revealing too much. It's not about openly declaring your interest in someone else. It's about sowing small seeds of doubt that allow the other person's imagination to do the rest of the work. When this happens, it's common for the person to start making unusual efforts to recapture your attention and reverse the situation, trying to get you back to the way you were. If you are no longer in direct contact with this person, or if communication has diminished, and you still maintain some form of connection, such as following each other on social networks, you can take advantage of this to leave hints of your supposed new life. You can, for example, share content that evokes good memories for that person, but without being obvious. For example, if you know he has a special appreciation for a certain movie from his childhood, you could casually mention that you are watching it, or share something related to that movie in your networks. If he likes a particular band, you could play a song in the background of a video, or mention a concert that interests you. The goal is to make him associate you with pleasant moments and happy memories, creating a kind of constant presence in his mind. Also, you can play with everyday details that you know are meaningful to that person. If they used to have coffee in a special place, you could upload a story walking down that street with a coffee in hand, evoking those shared moments. This creates a mixture of nostalgia and pleasure, keeping you present in their thoughts in a subtle but effective way. The idea is that, by combining the hint of a possible interest in another person with the evocation of pleasant memories, you manage to be in their mind constantly, generating a mixture of uncertainty and desire to reconnect. The goal here is to create a deep connection between certain habits, memories, and your presence in that person's life. For example, if you know that person has a special attachment to lasagna because it reminds them of fond moments cooking with their grandmother or mother, you could casually share that you are preparing lasagna at home. These types of actions can arouse strong emotions, as they associate those warm memories with your presence. You can use not only food but also music, television programs, special places, smells, and even traditions from different times of the year. Anything that evokes nostalgia and good memories can be a powerful tool. The trick is to frustrate expectations by making that person feel a slight fear, imagining that someone else might be occupying your attention, and eventually your mind, your heart. This fear of rejection can trigger a frantic desire to reconnect with you, driven by the ego that does not want to accept the idea of being rejected. In addition, it is fundamental that this person begins to associate you with pleasurable experiences. If you came from a stage where the relationship was marked by complaints and tensions, it is probable that this person felt discouraged to look for you, even if he or she did not express it openly. Even without words, the negative energy is perceived, and this anxiety or need for attention may have generated a repellent effect. That's why it's essential to learn to release that anxiety and let go of control. In doing so, you allow the roles to reverse. Now it's the other person who begins to feel that restlessness, that desire to be close. Using elements that connect that person to their childhood, to significant moments, or to loved ones like mother or grandmother, is a tactic that can have a tremendous impact. The power of these associations lies in their ability to awaken deep emotions and positive memories, creating an emotional bond that is hard to ignore. In this way, you get the person to not only think of you, but to do so with a feeling of warmth and a desire to regain what they feel they are missing. The book uses an interesting metaphor to explain how attraction and falling in love works. It is compared to the way a lark, a difficult bird to catch, is fascinated by seeing its reflection in a mirror. This reflection holds her spellbound, trapping her in a state of awe. In the same way, when we fall in love, we often fall in love with an enhanced version of ourselves, reflected in the other person. We see in them aspects that remind us of what we love about our own life and existence. but without that person ceasing to be who they are. The crucial thing here is that everything feels natural, without pretense. Once you have applied these techniques, alternating between being close and distant, it is advisable to move away for a while. You can disappear for a few days, or even weeks, stopping posting on social networks, and avoiding any visible contact. This absence creates a vacuum that makes the other person start to miss you intensely. It is in the lack of contact where desire intensifies, where what might have been a source of frustration or conflict before is diluted in the memory, and only the longing for your return remains. Over time, any shortcomings that may have existed are forgotten, and the only thing that lingers is the desire to have you around again. Of course, this only works if the other person's feelings have not completely disappeared. However, according to the book, those feelings are rarely completely extinguished. They lie dormant, waiting to be rekindled. The techniques discussed are effective ways to awaken those dormant feelings, bringing them back to the surface. This approach is powerful because it plays with the psychology of desire and memory. By knowing how to use these moments of absence and presence, you can reignite a connection that seemed to have gone cold, and keep it alive in a way that feels authentic and deep. Thank you so much for joining me today. See you soon.